Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be back here at the CBP Live event. My name is Matthew. I'm the COO and Sales Director for Brew Ninja, and it's great to talk to you guys. This is kind of my third time now. I've done the other two virtual conferences back in October, and I think back in spring. And yeah, really excited to be back. Year end is among us, and really fun to talk more about the brewery operations, and trying to provide some insight in terms of what we've experienced, we've seen, to the rest of the group. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Matthew. I pretty much handle everything at Brew Ninja in regards to sales, customer service, product. A little bit about my background. I actually studied accounting in university. In a different life, I would have been some kind of CPA doing your books anyways. So this talking about your brewery and your brewery operations is all very apt. Um, in the past, and of course, I gave that all up to be a salesperson. So now I do sales, and I've been through fintech companies, and now I'm working with, been working with a lot of breweries, a lot of you folks, the past 5 or 6 years now. And I really wanted to take some time today. Back in the fall conference, I did a talk on the brewery market being saturated, and some ways, measurements to make your brewery bulletproof, right? That's kind of the verbiage we use. And part of that presentation was really more about metrics and strategy and reporting. Today, I really want to take a step further and say, hey, look, let's be more tactical and say, talk about 5 things that I've seen in the past 5-6 years, from talking to breweries sizes 500 barrels to 10,000 barrels and up. The problems are very similar, right? And I've kind of chosen 5 main areas to talk about and come up with some ideas and tactics that, if you're seeing this issue at your brewery, hey, what can we do to assess it? What can we do? And of course, what can we do to stop the leak? And for those who have noticed, this is totally an AI generated background image. I typed in Bulletproof Keg and I got this, but at the same time, it does look more like chocolate milk instead of beer. So on to the actual, what are the bullets, right? So by coming up with some of these ideas, the 5 topics that we're going to cover today, we found some commonalities between the problems. Oftentimes they would be created because they were common practices that just aren't scalable. An example of that would be, hey, when I was a 1,000-barrel brewery, I used one Excel spreadsheet. It worked for everything that we were doing, great. But as you grow bigger, as you go from 1,000 to 3,000 to 5,000, a lot of people are still using that one same Excel spreadsheet. So some of the practices that they've inherited just aren't scalable. And when we start talking to those kind of customers and those breweries, we realize, hey, a shift needs to happen, right? Whether or not is to maybe switch to more Excel spreadsheets, or just condense it to a different type of programming, things like that. Other commonalities would be in this administrative workflow. So administrative errors tends to happen. They aren't caught earlier, or maybe just admin inefficiencies, too many hands, adding up to the practice that you guys are doing now, right? When you were a one-man band, great, you can do everything in the Excel spreadsheet. But as you added a sales rep, as you added a brewer, head brewer, assistant brewer, they, oftentimes we see that they all have their own little system going on. And unfortunately, they're just not really working well together. And of course, finally, just operational workflows, right? human errors can add up. Operational workflows can just add up and kind of become a time suck. So those are oftentimes the kind of issues that are driving, the holes, for example. So what are we going to talk about today? What are the holes that we're trying to plug up in your brewery? Well, first of all, kegs, right? Where are my kegs? Who has them? How much deposit do I owe? Not many people have a robust keg tracking system. Most people don't even charge deposits. So, what can I do at the brewery today to either create a system around tracking all of my keg inventory or looking at ways to maybe introduce a deposit? Invoicing. So, I've kind of grouped this topic in with invoicing workflow as well as receivables, right? Um, Poor invoicing operation flow happens so often. For example, um, I often see customers when they tell me what their sales reps are doing, it's saying, hey, my sales rep will, of course, make the sale, talk to the customer, receive the order, then emails maybe my accountant who has access to QuickBooks to say, hey, accountant, please go ahead and create an invoice for customer X. Great. Here's an accountant gets the information, sends an invoice over to, for example, Matt's Barbecue, and great. But that's 3 steps already, 3 separate workflows. And unfortunately, if anything changes from the customer, that's another 3 more steps handling back to your accountant. Even worse is many breweries don't have an internal accountant. Well, now every time you ping your accounting team or your third party accountant, they're going to charge you money for doing a batch of invoices. So, how can we streamline that? How can we utilize the tools you have right now to make things a little bit easier, right? Reviewing that internally will give you much better control over your brewery and much better control over your invoicing. And once we've invoiced the customers, now, of course, chasing down payments, that's another big issue. If you're so lucky that they give you a check on the spot, great. Not every state or customer is able to do that. Sometimes they wait, 20, 30 days before they actually pay you back. So there are many inefficiencies and things that you could do that can limit that or reduce that time. Inventory, of course, right? When we're looking at holes, we're looking at, hey, do we know, does the brewery have a good sense of the inventory on hand? Does the brewers have a good sense of the raw material inventory that they currently have in order to make better planning? If you're a brewery that says, hey, we're good, we do just in time brewing, so I only buy what I need for that batch, great. But again, as we scale larger, the need to control your raw material inventory does become more prevalent. We called it margin variances here, but really it's a matter of understanding your profitability, right? Knowing your profit margins, knowing your cost of goods. So it just means, do we know how much your products costs you? And do we know the up-to-date profitability of each SKU even? And finally, I want to talk about some accounting practices that we see often in breweries that while it's great for smaller businesses or while it's great right now, as we're looking at, hey, how can we empower the owner, empower the brewer on what's going on in the brewery? There are some changes and some ideas that I want to leave you guys to go back to your accounting team or your accountant to really say, hey, do we have the manpower, the ability to make some changes so my QuickBooks can tell me more information without having to wait until year end? Now, I do have to preface a little bit here. While I'm mostly focusing on these 5 areas today, just because we talked about it and we fixed all of these problems doesn't mean, the brewery won't have other problems. I'm just choosing to kind of focus on these 5 areas. But really want to take this time, we're coming to December. I think it's a great time for us to review certain things, go back to your teams and kind of review what's been done and what can we do next year that makes things a little bit better. All right, so kegs. For the most part, I understand, that your kegs are kind of a big driver of profit, right? It's cheaper to produce the beer and then just give it to, put it in kegs and sell it to your customers. Of course, your customers tend to be the bars and restaurants. And the unfortunate part is they're not very good to your kegs either. Restaurants can't live with them, can't live without them, right? So they tend to miss or lose your kegs. And you know what? Losing kegs is you're losing dollars at the end of the day. I read somewhere from another blog post that, hey, breweries lose about 5 to 20 keg shells per year. At about $150 per keg shell, that's thousands of dollars that you could be losing. Sometimes you don't even know it because most breweries may not have the proper tracking or the proper knowledge about their keg shells. Depending on where you are as well, not everybody is afforded the ability to charge their customers the deposit either, right? So if your area, hey, all the other breweries aren't charging deposit, and if you do, it's going to be more of a detrimental issue for yourselves. Then unfortunately, that's if you don't have deposits, you really don't have a great keg count as well. So you need one or the other. If you do charge deposits, it's a lot easier, even just using your accounting platform to determine, hey, I actually charged, let's say it's $10 per keg. The balance for Matt's Barbecue is actually $50. That means they should still have about 5 of my kegs lying around. It gives you a better understanding of, how many kegs your customers have without having to go through the whole tracking process. And of course, not too many people may have standardized process to track kegs. And what that just means is if you have, oftentimes people have some kind of log or Excel spreadsheet. Maybe it's a notebook at the brewery that logs all the kegs going in and out. Sometimes they don't have that even. So what can we do? So how do we track kegs? Of course, I have to plug, you could go with a management system, right? Products like us, Ecos, we have keg tracking built into the software already. And I do want to specify what is keg tracking. Now, you can definitely track kegs with the barcode style, right? We can print out barcodes and QR codes, label every keg, give it a serial number, and then use software to say, hey, look, scan this barcode. We now know what product's gone into it. Scan it when it goes to the customer. Scan it when it comes back. So that's something management software can do. That's something, something like KegShoe, more of a specialized keg tracking software can do as well. You can go even more hardcore and say, hey, some products out there includes GPS, includes weight. So you can definitely go with even more advanced keg tracking. So that's more on the scanning side of things. But there are ways to track kegs without the need of barcodes as well, right? You already know, hey, through an invoice, I've sold Matt's Barbecue a 6-stall or 2 half barrels. Great. I know that he has a 6-stall keg, 2 half barrel kegs. When they return one, you can just, a simple tally would do, or in some software's instances, you would be able to see a return of a keg shell or a tally of kegs and keg shells for each of these customers. Without software, I mean, specialized software as well. You can do other things in your operations to keep tabs of it. We've seen customers, maybe charge a very nominal deposit, or even if you do start charging a deposit, there are ways for the accountant to actually offset it so you don't actually charge the customer any money. You just at least have it on the invoice. So that allows you to keep tabs of the kegs coming in and out. Excel spreadsheet still works, right? Hey, every time a keg goes out to a customer, all you need is the keg size. Hey, this is a 6-still, a half barrel keg, gone to a customer name, Matt's Barbecue, date, or quantity. And when it comes back, just add it back. That should be a fairly simple tally. And at the very least, you have something there for you to use. Now, I do have two kind of asterisks and kind of footnotes here. We do understand, hey, barcode scanning isn't for everybody. If you are selling through distribution partners or one distribution partner, that just doesn't become feasible, because all you're going to do is scan the kegs. It's gone to the distro company. You don't really know where they go. They're not going to scan the kegs for you. So, it really doesn't make sense for you to go that route of keg tracking. Another thing that we could, breweries could look at is, hey, do I even need my own keg fleet? Right? If you're a small enough brewery, maybe the keg share type programs, companies like Keg Share or Keg Star, right? They will pretty much lease and loan you the kegs as you need them. So in low quantities, definitely financially, I think it makes sense. Once you get to higher quantities, maybe, we've definitely seen customers or breweries do a mixture, right? Hey, I have my own small fleet, but in peak season, I'll also buy some kegs from Keg Share or Keg Star, and then kind of have a mixture of that going on. So something to think about for 2024, right? What are we doing with our kegs? How can we track it a little bit better? At the very least, how can we make an Excel spreadsheet to keep tabs of what's going on? Invoicing. So this is a kind of a combined topic. A lot of invoicing problems that we see with breweries, it really stems from kind of the operation and the relationship between sales to accounting, right? Inefficient invoicing operations. Like I said earlier, hey, if your sales rep has to ping the accountant every time for an invoice, well, what can we do better? What can we do to make life a little easier for my sales rep and for my accountant? So I've definitely seen scenarios where breweries, hey, we don't invoice until Friday, right? We pick one day to do all the invoicing for my accountant to do it, especially if we're dealing with third-party accounting firms where you kind of have to pay them every time you get them to do work. Yeah, makes sense. Go ahead and do it one day. We do all of our deliveries, and there, Bob's your uncle. But that also comes with their own problems. You now don't afford yourself that early invoicing before your delivery. So if your customer wants to pay with a credit card, they can't just get the invoice early, or they don't sometimes have the time to prepare the check for you when you arrive. So we do suggest looking at that process and say, okay, well, are there ways for your sales rep to invoice directly? Can he or she go, let's say, to QuickBooks to generate the invoice? Now, many owners may think, hey, I don't want just any sales guy touching my accounting software, but there are ways to limit access, right? Every software has a set of permissions every user could be limited to. So your sales rep could just be making invoices, and he or she won't be able to touch anything else. That will save you a lot more time, in some cases a lot more money as well. Other invoicing problems may be, hey, again, slow to receive payment, right? If we invoice only on the day of delivery, well, I don't give my customers a really good time frame or leeway to have a chance to pay me earlier, right? So they might take, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in order to pay you, um, and and that just, again, we want to have that as quick as possible overall. So what can we do here, right? First of all, yeah, as I mentioned, hey, sales rep can access tools like QuickBooks directly, review the workflow, right? Maybe we can introduce a middle software to, maybe a CRM or maybe a ordering type software in order to funnel those invoices, funnel those sales so that we can just integrate to QuickBooks or push it there um, when it's invoiced or when it's paid. Some users are also using their POS software, right? Square, Apollo. They might have some invoicing or some invoicing features that you can utilize. And again, something that the sales rep can access, doesn't have to touch your accounting system. So it's a little safer for some brewery owners that, hey, I don't want too many people touching my accounting. We can also consider the credit card processing from different accounting packages, right? QuickBooks has a way to include credit card payments through the invoicing. So when you send the QBO invoice, there would be a button that says, hey, click here to pay with your credit card. You're not charged a card not present fee. The fee is generally a little bit more favorable than if you were to keep the credit card numbered yourselves and then punch it into the POS system or your credit card machines. On top of that, there are additional products you could consider, like a third-party software. We've worked with people who use Benji Pay, which is a kind of a middleware between QuickBooks and the payment side. So consider this. QuickBooks will, on your, when you press a button in QuickBooks, you can send an invoice to your customer. But if they don't pay right away, QuickBooks isn't going to keep emailing them, reminding them to pay. So there are products out there that can do this accounts receivable step solely for you so that, hey, they can keep the credit card on file, they can process payment automatically if you want to, or they can keep pinging the customer to say, hey, it's been 5 days since we sent you the invoice. Here's a link again, please pay, right? And keep trying. Or if there's a credit card failure, they can keep trying the credit card on file or send information to the customer to input new credit cards, things like that. And finally, things to kind of review internally as well as, what is your AR turnover? AR turnover just means your accounts receivables, how fast we're getting paid on the invoices that we issue, right? The faster it is, the better the number. If I turn over all of my invoices within about 2 weeks, great, that's good enough. If we start seeing timelines of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, month and a half, then maybe there's some things we can do better internally, or maybe consider some third-party help in order to kind of shorten that timeline. All right, inventory. A lot of times we work with breweries that come from either Excel spreadsheet inventory lists, or even if they were using another product before, it's oftentimes just maybe not used properly or just doesn't fit the way that they want to run their business, right? And the kind of the major problem overall is most owners don't exactly know how correct their inventory is, right? If I don't have real-time inventory insight into my brewery, then Sales won't exactly know, hey, when, the number that I look at, is it fully correct? Did other sales reps already make sales on this number, right? Or maybe there was a production run and the numbers just didn't update the Excel file yet. We also probably don't see too many people do inventory counts, even though we probably should, right? Inventory counts are done at minimum once a year when you do your year end, but sometimes we see people don't do them at all. Or, my preference is to tell people maybe once a quarter is pretty good, right? If you update your numbers pretty regularly and you do a physical count every month or every 3 months, that's going to be a pretty good number moving forward. Raw materials as well isn't always counted, and if you don't have a good hold of your raw materials, it's going to be harder for your brewers to plan out, hey, if I want to do all of these batches the next 3-4 weeks, what do I need to buy, right? Do I have anything on hand? Because otherwise, every couple weeks, I got to go back and do some counts or look through the inventory instead of just looking at, your system, your spreadsheet, and know that it's a fairly correct number. So what do we need to do here, right? Know your numbers. Set a standard for inventory counts. And sometimes you don't even need to do a full count every month, right? It could be this month we're doing just the keg products. Or this week we're doing keg products. Next week we're doing just the canned products, right? Create a system and standard around counting so that it's a little bit easier for you to look at your spreadsheets, wherever the inventory numbers are, and know that, hey, yeah, we update this very often. Create a system around production planning. So whether it may be, keeping minimums in your inventory system, right? If you're using software, or even if you're just using Excel, when hey, my Cascade hops is now down to 1 bag or 40 pounds. Well, sure, great. When we hit 40 or below 40, we're going to start making some calls and we're going to start doing some purchases. Perfect. Create a system around either based on your minimums or based on your production schedule, right? Hey, if we look at the few batches coming up, do we have enough, raw materials for it? Then we can make the call to BSG or wherever and kind of purchase those grains at that point. Have a way to allow salespeople see into your inventory. I think that's a big thing that I don't see often. Oftentimes by the time a customer comes to us, they would say, my sales rep doesn't always know the exact number that they need, right? Maybe they get an inventory printout on Monday to say, hey, this is what we have for you to sell. Great. But by Wednesday, if you have more than one sales rep, who's going to update that number to say, hey, Matt just sold 2 kegs of IPA. Well, there's only 1 keg left, but John doesn't know that. John sells another 2 kegs, right? So we see a lot of problems with overselling. And then at that point, your customer needs to, your sales rep needs to go back to your customer, refine the number again. And it becomes a bit of a headache, right? Of course, not going to say it, but hey, software can help. It won't necessarily fix everything, but it can help, right? So either looking at, inventory add-ons to, if you have QuickBooks already, if you're a really large brewery, maybe, or using like SAP or a big type of ERP system, right? Maybe it's time to input or add in those inventory add-ons, right, into your existing system. Of course, if you don't have anything, Brew Ninja is always here too. Once you know your numbers, right, once you know, hey, these inventory levels are good, great, we're selling them, but now we also need to know, what's my COGS? What's my cost of goods? How much money am I really making out of every 4-pack, every case, every keg, right? But oftentimes I come to this segue of what's included. What are we looking at when we are thinking about your cost of goods sold, right? Okay, of course, all the ingredients that goes into it, that's a major factor, right? So being able to trace your or have a knowledge of my ingredients cost, whether it's going up or down based of my purchase orders or bills, information from suppliers. Same thing with cans, labels, and lids. Hey, are we um, can we buy in larger formats or bulk formats so that we can save some unit costs? But one thing people tend to forget is there's a lot of shrinkage and errors that goes on when we're packaging beer, right? You're going to get low fills that oftentimes, if there's no real good system in place, that won't get costed into your cost of goods. Or there's going to be malfunctions in your sleever, or there's going to be just general shrinkage, right? If I start off with a tank of beer that cost me about $1,000, this run I can package 100 beers. Great, that's $10. Sorry, yeah, let's say 1,000 cans of beer. Great, that's $1 a can. But maybe next run I only do 900. Now it's $1.20, right? So that can fluctuate, and looking at your shrinkage in regards to how efficient we are with packaging, just what's coming out of the tank, plus looking at breakages, right? Looking at low fills. Hey, every batch, do we know if we're getting more or less low fills? Do we know if there's any issues with an earlier batch? Maybe, hey, the labeler had malfunctions, and then it cost that batch to be extra expensive, right? Oh, we ruined 500 labels. Crap. Okay, fine. We'll cost that in. But oftentimes, if we're not including those breakages, you're not going to get the truest number in terms of what's going into your beer. What about labor? And then what about excise tax? I get that a lot, right? Hey, can we add excise tax into the cost of beer? And while I can say, yeah, I get it, half a barrel of your half barrel kegs tax is about like $1.50 or $1.75. Oftentimes we kind of on the finance and accounting side, we more view this less of a kind of a unit cost uh, or unit expense, but more so on operational, like just overhead, right? Or operational expense where, hey, whether or not you brew beer, you're still going to hire your head brewer to be there for 8 hours a day, for example. Or when you brew more beer, excise tax is still going to tack on in the same rate. It's something I think a lot of brewers should talk to the accountant about. I am not a trained accountant, but it's definitely a conversation that I've had with brewer owners very often. And some people want to just add it in for the knowledge of, hey, if we include all of these things, what's that number looking like, rather than to include this for accounting purposes, right? So maybe it's ways to implement some of these numbers into your Excel spreadsheet that you may have already. Implement them in like a year-end calculation to say, hey, roughly this is how much we create each batch or each style of beer. And of course, if you repitching yeast and using multiple generations of yeast, the question is always, hey, it's easy to view yeast on an annual basis. This year we used $1,000 worth of yeast. Great. And we produced 100 batches. Now I can know how much per batch. But at the same time, if we get to the nitty gritty per unit, per SKU, that becomes a lot harder as we want to look at kind of real-time cost to your products. And of course, looking all of looking at all of these, really find ways to analyze your cost fluctuations, right? Hey, ingredients are going up, hops are going up in price. You can start tracking it yourself and kind of figure out, well, how does it affect your margins? How does it affect how you sell the beer? And finally, a kind of controversial topic for a lot of people um, who deal with accounting, I guess, cost versus accrual accounting. I have plenty of conversations with owners about this. I have plenty of conversations with accountants about this in regards to what there's no good way. It's just which way do we are we using now, and is it servicing us, in a way that we want it to. But let's look at the difference. What is cost accounting and what is accrual accounting, right? So cost accounting is pretty much when I buy a bag of grain in my books, I'm going to expense it. It's going to cost of goods sold, expense account. I bought $1,000 worth of grain. Great, it's expensed. It's assumed that I will use everything there by the end of the year, which for the most part, that assumption is correct. But that assumption doesn't allow you to see mid-year or mid-period, hey, how much grain do I have left, right? Maybe after a batch or two, you bought, the $1,000 became 500, but on the accounting end, it would be very difficult to view, hey, what is my assets? What are my assets in accounting and the value of those assets versus, especially if we need to go and expense everything right off the bat. The good thing about cost accounting is that it is simpler. On your day to day, when you buy things, it goes straight to expenses. When you make a sale, straight revenue and cash, right? So oftentimes you don't accrue the revenue is pretty much accrued, counted in right away. Um, but the cons of it again is that, hey, it's harder to see errors in production. It's harder to see the value of what you have at the brewery from an accounting standpoint. Um, and of course, we usually, and most breweries do this now, and you know what, we expense it. And at the end of the year, we're going to go ahead and do a year-end inventory to update those asset accounts, right? Hey, turns out we bought, $1,000 worth of grain. We now have, $100 left. So we're going to pull that back from the expense account and put it into an asset account and balance everything out again. Versus accrual accounting. Accrual accounting views your purchase of that grain as asset right off the bat. So we, on an accounting level, would say, hey, you bought a bag of grain, perfect. It's $1,000. Now we have $1,000 worth of raw material. In terms of a manufacturing style of accounting practices, we usually say, hey, great, I have all of this raw material value that I can see in the books. When a brewer goes ahead and says, hey, I'm going to start brewing and take all, my grain, my hops, my yeast, and put it into a tank, on the accounting level, you would then move that value. Let's say that's, $500 worth of raw material used. We would move that into an account called a work in progress. This is still going to show up in your books as assets. It's still going to be things that you're holding and offers value. And then when you package, it's going to show up in a finished goods inventory account. So this way, when you look at your books, you're going to see, hey, I have $1,000 left of raw materials, things that I haven't used yet, maybe about $500 of value in tanks or barrels, things that are still in process of developing and making it into the final product. And of course, I have, $500 worth of final product that I haven't sold yet, right? The moment you sell, that's in terms of accrual accounting, that is when, hey, I'm going to expense that number and know that my cost of goods sold is up to date with the type of revenue and type of sales I'm seeing in the brewery. Of course, the pro is, hey, I get to see inventory values. I get to see real time cost of goods used, right? So now I can say my revenue minus my cost of goods sold roughly is my margin on products, right? But of course, the con is there's just more active work, right? Needs to involve the production team a little bit more to update the numbers. Maybe, and it doesn't need to be daily, right? Oftentimes I see it either a weekly or bi-weekly update to the accountant, say, hey, we currently have this much beer inside my tanks. Great, I'm going to update my WIP. Or we have this much um, uh, finished goods product, so I'm going to update my accounts there. Ultimately, it's easier. You can still, you can still see it on a real-time value, but you don't have to update daily. You can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, but at least you'll get more updates and better numbers moving forward throughout the year. And that's those 5 topics. I mean, that went by really fast. It's about only 40 minutes in. But everything I've said, hey, you can do it with a brewery management software. You can do it without a brewery management software. Of course, I have to pitch Brew Ninja a little bit here, but at the end of the day, I think it's a matter of spending that bit of time looking at your brewery and say, what do I want to implement, right? What are we doing right now that isn't really working for us? Can we add small components to it, or do we need to invest in something bigger like a Brew Ninja, Ecos, Beer 30 in order to make life a little bit easier? That's all we all want to do. We all want to just make your life a little bit easier day by day. So and on that note, thank you so much for your time, guys and girls. If you have any questions, please email me at matt@brewninja.net. If you're interested in these slides today, please email me and I'm more than happy to send that over to you. If you've missed our talk back in October, it's available on the CBP YouTube channel. And at the same time, if you do want to email me for those slides as well, please do ahead, and I'm more than happy to send that over. I'll give it a quick second, see if anybody have any questions. And if not, I'll see you all in Charleston. Please hit me up. I have never been there, and I would love to see you all there. Thanks.